Hello and welcome to the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast for September 6, 2024. My name is Tom Luongo, and we have a lot to talk about. It is episode 193, and I have the great pleasure of finally getting a chance to meet someone whose work I've been following for quite a long time now. His name is Ben Davidson of Suspicious Observers, and we're hoping to get Dave Collum along for the ride for this podcast, but Dave has not shown up yet. And I don't know, after a while, like, well, if Dave doesn't show up, well, then we will do what we normally do when Dave doesn't show up to the Tommy Kerrigan podcast with Jim Kunstler, which is we will make terrible fun of him. And we will, imply that he has sex with farm animals and stuff. It'll be great. But that being said, let's bring Ben in. And Ben, nice to meet you finally. Again, like I said, big fan of your work. And thank you for taking the time.
I appreciate the invitation. I'm happy to be here, and I do not have sex with farm animals.
Unlike Dave Collum and Jim Kunstler, it's fine. Yeah.
Exactly.
Good. Be a good sport for taking care of that. It is a tradition, actually. We call it the bald ones. We do a four-way all the time, and whenever somebody leaves the room, bad things occur to their reputation. So, with that said, Ben, I for the, it's funny. I'm not sure what it was, but I tagged you one day, or I tried tagging you one day on Twitter about something that was going on, and lo and behold, you responded, which was very cool. So I said, well, let's just forge a relationship here. Let's just have a conversation. So, I don't know. I think for the most part, certainly within my audience, everybody knows who you are, but what I'd like to do is, give yourself, give people a little bit of a background as to what you do, what Suspicious Observer is, and what the purpose of all of this is, and what we're worried about. Because ultimately, we're going to talk in terms today of the general anxiety about what's going on in the world, and Ben has a unique view on it. So I like to start it there.
Well, sure. I have a YouTube channel called Suspicious Observers, and it is a daily show that covers a few different things. Every day we cover what the sun is doing. That's sunspots, solar flares, anything it's throwing in Earth's direction. We also tend to cover big earthquakes, big volcanoes, big weather events, but also science news that is coming out. And specifically, we like to focus on science that's related to the ongoing magnetic pole shift of the planet and things that are related to that. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have heard of it. A lot of people have not heard of it. Very few people have a solid grasp on just how significant of an event this is, and mm-hmm. just how rapidly everything is progressing right now. And even fewer people have an idea as to how this actually relates to the political, economic, and cultural clown world that we are living in at the moment. But they are, in fact, all tied together. Shockingly enough.
Well, it's funny you say that. And when I first encountered your work, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 years ago now. And we started going through it. So I have a background in chemistry and electricity and magnetism, all this stuff. So when I was watching your channel, like the science and the physics just seemed sound to me. When I was first introduced to concepts such as the global electric circuit and how space weather, or how the sun's output impacts the magnetic field, impacts the entire Earth, it makes sense. I understand magnetic induction. I understood all those things. And I'm like, well, and so for you to say something like all of these ideas, right? These problems that we're seeing socially, politically, and whatnot are all tied to what the changes in the output in the sun and the changes that are occurring within the Earth itself. They make sense because everything within this system evolved within that regular cyclical shift in our position within the universe itself. So to me, it always made perfect sense. Um, so this is why I continue to listen, can not only just continue to listen to your work, but to kind of integrate it a little bit on what I see on a regular basis. So when I see all these other things happening, I'm like, well, everyone's going mad because everything else is going mad.
Yeah, I would say that everything going mad is probably a pretty good description of it. Um, the
So,
underlying,
I'm sorry,
sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. I
No, go
was going to
ahead.
say the underlying reason for a lot of the things that are happening
Mm-hmm.
is power and control on behalf of a few people. They are trying to grab as much power, control, resources as humanly possible,
Mm-hmm.
um, through policies, through the destruction of freedom, the destruction of traditions, history, cultures, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is, for those who have been watching, let's say, somebody, just to give an example, somebody like Alex Jones,
Mm-hmm.
you know that these things have been happening for many, many years, decades,
Right.
even. But it was always very slow, very incremental. Despite how evil these actors seem, we've got to give credit where it's due. They've had an incredible amount of patience and careful planning and having things go step by step in a way that really flies under the radar to the point where the vast majority of people don't even know it's happening. That's not the case anymore. Things are going haywire so quickly that it's obvious they don't care if some people wake up to this fact. They're not trying to hide anything. And now they are being, somewhat reckless as opposed to ultra slow and patient and careful. They're being reckless because they know there's no time for a reckoning. They are
Mm.
being utterly blatant, moving as fast as they can, spending like there's no tomorrow because they know that on a certain medium level timeline, there isn't one.
Mm.
And the goal is for them to get as much resources, power, control as possible when this event, this natural event, actually takes place, with the idea that they would be in the most advantageous position in the aftermath to basically sit atop the pyramid once again, in what I've described will be the new age of Earth.
Mm.
And it's the kind of thing where unless you put it all under that kind of umbrella where there's this bigger goal and there's a reason for this haste on their part, it's hard to necessarily understand at all why the entire world has gotten so crazy so quickly.
Mm. Yeah, it's funny you put it in those terms because I as you were talking, I didn't say it's funny. It's interesting that you put it in those terms, and it's because it's very consistent with the way you present your material at Suspicious Observers, which is that we're running up against a natural event that is very likely to be catastrophic. Um, whether you, I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here. Okay. Whether you believe that the catastrophe is going to exist, going to happen, as in what Ben is saying is correct, you believe it. You don't have to, but, and I'm not here to in any way, manner, shape, or form to throw shade on that. What I'm saying is I'm just running an intellectual exercise here, which is to say, look, you know, that's one way of describing their behavior, what Ben just put forth. And, it is and from that perspective, it's perfectly valid. Like if they understand it, that this is coming, then they would be acting. This is exactly the way they would be acting. I've taken the position that all those systems that they put in place, all those people they bought, all that bureaucracy they put in place, and all the rest of it has reached its lifespan, just its natural lifespan, regardless of the potential for a solar physics catastrophe. Um, Saying it's just a natural lifespan of these types of systems, and eventually the law, in economic terms, the law of diminishing marginal utility, says that we all turn around and go, look, this isn't benefiting us anymore. Y'all, and then the natural state for them is to say, well, once we start to rebel against it, for them to clamp down even harder, and then it just becomes this ever escalating feedback effect of them trying to clamp down while we keep trying to say no. But when you so and that's another way of looking at it. So what I'm saying here is that it's an interesting way of looking at it from two different perspectives, getting to the same result, and it may be partially both of those things happening at the same time, I guess, is where I'm getting at. It's like these two distinct rationales for their behavior could easily be a marriage of these two perspectives, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. What do you think about that?
Yeah, certainly. And given the meticulous and long-term nature and complexity of their plans,
Mm-hmm.
who's to say it's not both? You
Right.
know, and that would make quite a good bit of sense.
Mm-hmm.
I look at the way that government are spending money. I look at the way billionaires are building bunkers,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of impossible for me to believe that the former is not a major part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Though I could see how the latter um, deserves some credit for the current state of the world that we're in as well.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, I know I agree. Again, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. That I don't, me personally, my personal opinion here, it is of the marriage of both. Like I, I have been, the work that you've done over suspicious observers, and the information that you've presented and the way you've presented it. And I've talked to other people. I have friends and patrons who are heavily into astrology, and they're all saying the same thing in their idiom that you're saying in yours and I'm saying in mine. Like it winds up being, and when you look at it from those different perspectives, and they're all lining up together, and then you think about, okay, well, this is the system we all grew up in, this is the system we all evolved within, and the evidence. I want you to go into um some of the cyclic nature of what what we're talking about here, because I think we've kind of gotten ahead of ourselves and we haven't like laid out some of the groundwork. Like talk about the 12,000 year disaster cycle, and how we move through where we are in the relative position of the galactic ecliptic and all of those things, because I think it's all valid and I think it's all interesting.
sure. Well, I like to break this up into two parts.
Okay.
Um, One is the relatively certain information and what it means for us here on Earth. And the other one is the best guesses on some of the details based on the evidence that we have to work with, the tools in the toolbox. So here's what we know for certain. There is a major magnetic event on the planet every 12,000 years. There's a minor one on the half point every 6,000 years in between.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a magnetic pole shift, a geomagnetic excursion, a rapid pole flip. There's a lot of different names for it, but essentially that's what we're talking about. During this time, the magnetic poles begin to move, and the
Mm-hmm.
magnetic field that protects the Earth from the sun, cosmic rays, supernova, gamma ray bursts, all of those scary energetic things from space
Right.
begins to weaken at the exact same time. This has the effect of really changing the environment of our planet in a number of different ways, um, which I'll get to in just a moment. So,
Sure.
uh, the last mini half cycle event was 6,000 years ago. The last major event was 12,000 years ago. There was a mini event 6,000 years before that at 18,000 years ago, a major event at 24,000 years ago. And this goes back pretty much as far as the geology will let us look at it. They're much harder to identify when you get back past about 60,000 years. But we know that this cycle has existed pretty perfectly. And some of the really strong events that happened before 60,000 years ago, where those are dated to, would line up with the cycle, even though some of the ones in between aren't really easily noticed. So essentially, last major event was 12,000 years ago, last mini event 6,000 years ago. It is the exact time for another one of these things to be happening. And what do we see on the planet right now? The magnetic poles are moving and they are speeding up faster and faster. The magnetic field of our planet, our protection, is weakening faster and faster. That's accelerating as well. And so that's one of those things that's likely not a coincidence. The exact time we would be expecting this major magnetic event to be happening on the planet, and we are seeing the exact things we would be expecting to see. And not just with the magnetic poles and overall strength of the magnetic field, but different layers of the atmosphere, including the very top layer of the atmosphere, which is called the ionosphere. We are seeing it in the crust, in the mantle, and arguably even all the way down to some of the activity in Earth's core. And so we are literally seeing every sign that this is happening again now at the exact time that it would be expected in terms of the cycle. Now, what does this mean for our planet? Mm-hmm. Pretty much all of the recent studies on this are saying the exact same thing. This is a very significant event for the planet, both in terms of radiation and in terms of the climate. So the loss of the magnetic field, the first thing it does is it lets in all those scary things from space to a higher degree than we are used to them penetrating into the atmosphere and all the way down to ground level. And so anywhere from 60% to 200% more radiation from the sun, from cosmic rays, and other things like that. This has a critical impact on our DNA. This has a critical impact on cellular processes, on brain function, on our cardiac system, pretty much everything. For those who know a bit about biology, there's very little in our bodies that isn't an ion-mediated process. And what that means is there's a charged particle that's involved. That's where the term electrolyte comes from. Electro, whether it's magnesium, sodium, calcium, and these things actually govern how our body works.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm sorry, I didn't. But just to remind everybody, we are electrical creatures. Like our everything as a 25-year bench chemist, and this is part of the reason why I really wanted to have Dave Collum in here today to talk about this in these terms. Like we are electrical creatures. Like our hearts beat on a sinus rhythm, which is it's incredibly important that we are in electrical balance. And if there are external events that are impacting the way we internally move electrons through the body and affect our own internal circuits, that's going to have an effect on our physiology. And probably the heart is probably the most, I would think, just a priori, is the thing that is the most vulnerable to this.
It certainly is. In a very close second place would be processes in the brain, from cognitive to emotional. Mm-hmm. Most people know that, radiation can damage DNA and cause mutations, cause cancer, things like that. But a lot of them don't know that it can affect our mitochondria, it can affect our energy levels, it can affect the oxygen levels in the blood and how well the oxygen is transported around. It can affect liver and kidney function. thyroid function. Basically, there's almost nothing in the human body that can't be affected by this radiation. So that's number one. That's the first thing that happens. The other thing is this extra radiation has a pretty powerful impact on the ozone. And so we see extra ozone destruction during this time. That allows more ultraviolet light to reach the surface, further enhancing the radiation issues.
Yes.
But this extra ultraviolet radiation and the extra radiation itself messes with something called the global atmospheric electric circuit. This affects everything from major oscillations like El Nino and La Nina to individual cloud structures. Clouds come together because of electrostatic attraction between water vapor, dust, particles, etc. And so having this electromagnetic radiation entering the Earth's system impacts precipitation, it impacts lightning, it impacts storms, hurricanes, and this applies to both rain and snow. And so we have a major radiation intake for our bodies, ourselves, at the exact same time that the climate is changing pretty significantly. And on top of that, the number of animals that use the magnetic field, we're talking about, this is a lot more than just birds here in their seasonal migrations. Tons of marine creatures, from sharks, whales, different kinds of fish, sea turtles. It impacts phytoplankton, chlorophyll, land mammals like deer and rabbits, insects, plants from seed to flowering. All of these things are affected by magnetic fields. And so we have animal navigation, whether that's for migration, foraging, in the case of salmon and many other creatures, finding their mating locations. That is getting screwed up at the same time as we're taking in more radiation into our bodies at the exact same time that the climate is going haywire. And it is the combination of these events during these magnetic shifts on the planet that have caused so many scientists recently, in those papers I was mentioning, to outright call this an extinction event for many species. One of the best papers on this was from 2019, and they basically were tracking all of the megafauna extinctions that were known. And they found that they kept being grouped at these 12,000 year marks. And, 12,000 years ago, 24,000 years ago, 36,000 years ago, 48,000 years ago, right at the exact same time as these magnetic events were happening on the planet. And so just to quickly summarize what we've said so far is this is a pretty perfect cycle going back as long as the geologic evidence will allow us to look. We are perfectly due in time for this thing to happen again. Everything you would expect to see if it was happening is happening. And this is a very, very significant event for the biosphere, the life on Earth, from microbes all the way up to humans, elephants, whales, things like that. It's pretty well known that if you disrupt the food chain anywhere, it has major effects up and down the food chain. And we're talking about something that impacts the food chain significantly in thousands of different places. There's nothing on Earth that isn't going to be affected by this. And so that is sort of the relatively definitive, you can't blow any holes in it, facts about what we're going through. And so I would say that's part one. The fact that we're due in time, we're seeing it happen now, and this is very, very bad news. Now, we actually have a tiny bit more bad news this cycle that didn't exist in previous cycles because humans are so dependent on electricity. And unfortunately, one of the things the magnetic field does is while it is blocking out the dangerous radiation from the sun, it's also keeping safe all of the electronics on Earth. For those who have ever heard about the Carrington event, a major solar flare in 1859 set telegraph wires on fire, set telegraph offices on fire. It shocked telegraph operators in 1921. It electrically shut down the New York Railroad. In 2003, it blew several transformers in Scandinavia. In 1989, it took out power to the entire province of Quebec. As the magnetic field weakens, the entire Earth is going to be vulnerable to these things. And while all of that other stuff I talked about is going on, imagine we lose global power. There's no food chain supply. There's no transporting food around. There's no water purification. There's no water distribution to the tap. There's no 911. There's no gasoline. There's no ATMs. There's no refrigeration. There's no air conditioning. There's no heat. There's no internet. There's just all of us back in nature without any of the infrastructure systems. And so this is about as significant as it gets, not to mention, some of the other things that you start to think about later, like, okay, what happens when all the nuclear power plants in the world lose power at the exact same time? And so this is something that is not anywhere near talked about as much as it should be. But
it's
this
funny,
is on our plate.
I was going to say, as you were going through that list, I keep flashing back to the conversation that I've been having with my partner Dexter White for 25 years now, which is that because we refuse to deal properly with our nuclear waste, we just have it sitting in pools, being run by diesel generators, that every time there's a hurricane, there's always the potential for, in Florida, there's always potential for a potential nuclear meltdown, because if we have the cascading effects of complexity collapse in a society, even if we don't have a Carrington event, Ben, like our Carrington plus event or whatever you want to call it, even if that doesn't happen, and I want you to speak to what you think the best guess is as to when and how and all of that stuff. For the most part, I know what your answers are, but what I'm getting at here is that even if that doesn't happen, the amount of pressure that you're describing, and we have to take into our account here on the systems, the systems themselves are to the point, and we have crazy friggin' oligarchs trying to arrogate power and what's left to themselves and bring it and take it for themselves and decomplexify society. Like, the whole thing starts to collapse. We don't even need the Carrington event to have this be a civilizational event, is what I'm kind of getting.
Definitely. There's no doubt about that. This is bad even before I got to the electrical issues with our technology.
Right.
From the health, climatological, and magnetic navigational issues that are going to be hitting every creature and cascading up and down the food chain. Mm-hmm. This is very serious. And so this is one of the things I'm focusing on, based on the math of how it's been accelerating. It's looking like this is going to come to a head either in the 2030s or 2040s. I know people want to hear exact dates or exact years and other things like that. That's not really something that's possible mathematically and scientifically. We can give that window of a range, but this is us, our children, our grandchildren. It's important, and it needs to be understood and prepared for in ways that I'm just not seeing in the world right now, which is scary.
It is scary. So, before I go any further, let's explain to people what we're talking about. What's happening here is let's go back to the X-class solar flares we had back in May, where we had everybody was getting together and having watch parties for the aurora in Florida. Really? That's not good, guys. I remember watching that going, yeah, okay. Part of the nagging skepticism, and I will be honest that some of my skepticism has been sitting out there for years now. And that event just that was it. I'm like, I'm done. Nope, sorry, I can't do this anymore. I can't deny this anymore, or even just remain skeptical about it. So talk about what the actual mechanism for like how the Carrington event happened, and then go through the process of explaining why it's worse now than it
Sure.
was, say, back in 1859.
Sure. So what happened back in 1859 is a massive solar flare, probably at a rating of what we'd call about X80.
Okay.
And I'll get to these rating scales in a bit.
Okay.
Approximate X80 solar flare launched a ton of charged plasma towards the Earth. When it hit the Earth, this plasma did two things. It penetrated down through the atmosphere, causing an ambient electric charge to amplify in the atmosphere. And it also lit up the auroras, the northern lights and the southern lights,
Mm-hmm.
to such a degree that they actually induced electric current through the crust and through the lower atmosphere. Now, the combination of those two electrical effects is what set telegraph wires on fire. It's what blew the transformers in Quebec and in Scandinavia. And essentially, scientists know that if something like that were to happen again, it could take out global power. And when that happens and it's out everywhere and nobody can really come to help because they're dealing with their own situations, we
Mm-hmm.
could be talking years to decades without power, at which point 90 to 95% of the world could die while we're waiting for power to come back. What happened in May of this year was very, very similar, but it really, really shouldn't have been. One of the best ways to gauge how big of a whack the Earth takes from the sun is
Mm-hmm.
to see where the auroras, the northern and southern lights, are visible from. And this time they were visible from Puerto Rico, which hadn't happened since 1859 in the Carrington event. And they were visible in the South Pacific, in regions that didn't even see them during the Carrington event. And so, from an Earth whack perspective, we took almost as great of a hit as we did back then. The
Mm-hmm.
problem is, this was an X1, an X2, and an X3 solar flare. We're talking orders of magnitude smaller than what happened in 1859. And yet it created almost the same effect here on Earth. And this was something that we had actually been monitoring for quite some time, that we see what the sun does. We know the power of what the sun throws at Earth, but the way the Earth reacts to it, the hit that the Earth is taking, is far more than we've been expecting. And this has probably happened 2 or 3 dozen times over the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason it's happening is because our magnetic field, our magnetic protection from the sun, is weakening. So less and less from the sun is able to do more and more here on Earth. And we actually, we had been suggesting that that was the case for about 18 months. And then earlier this year, it was actually in April, one of the best geophysical scientists in Russia came out and said that one of the strongest accelerations in this process took place in March of 2023, which really explained how big of a jump things were taking in terms of the sun impacting the Earth. And what we are seeing now is that, you know, if we started to lose the magnetic field at a significant rate in the middle of the 1800s,
Mm-hmm.
about 150 years later, the year 2000, we had lost about 10%. They upgraded that number to 15% just 10 years later in 2010. And here in 2024, we're probably down around 30% now. So we've lost about 20% in the last 24 years after losing 10% over 150 years. This is a significant acceleration, and it actually matches the acceleration of the movement of the magnetic poles as well. And so what we're seeing is a rapid acceleration towards a breaking point that, again, based on where we were at various times over the last several decades to maybe century or so, and some of the accelerations that have taken place and the frequency with which these accelerations are taking place about every 7 years or so, that this should really be hitting a critical point in the 2030s or 2040s to where, you know, we might not need a Carrington event. Now, granted, geology says Carrington level solar flares happen about every 150 to 200 years. So with the last one being 165 years ago, we're in the red zone for another one. But as we saw in May, it's not going to take something that powerful to have the same level of effect here on Earth. You know, we're down 25, 30% of the magnetic field. What happens when we're down 50%? What happens when we're down by 70%? Something very small from the sun could act like something huge, like a super flare. And so those electrical problems that we were mentioning a few minutes ago, those are looking relatively certain, from the loss of power to the issues with nuclear. All of that stuff is looking more and more likely because of how vulnerable Earth is. It's kind of like, okay, in 1859, we were in a boxing match where our opponent was wearing gloves and we were wearing a helmet. Okay, now we're still in a boxing match, but we don't have a helmet, and one of his gloves came off and it's actual, knuckle bone hitting us as opposed to hitting the helmet. When the magnetic field decreases even further, it's like you've handed the other boxer a baseball bat and you still don't have your helmet. Yeah. And so that's a good way of thinking about the vulnerability. Okay, if you're in a boxing match, you're wearing a helmet, your opponent has boxing gloves, you can still get knocked out, but boy, is that going to take a big punch. If you don't have a helmet and they don't have gloves, and moreover, they have a baseball bat, it's much easier to knock you out, isn't it? Oh, yeah. And so that's basically what we're looking at in terms of the risk of a global EMP from the sun in the years ahead. And, this could happen before the magnetic flip actually occurs. What May told us was that, hey, look, if that had been just a little bit bigger, we could have lost global power. And then we're basically back to the Stone Age, waiting for the magnetic pole shift to occur. And so it's sort of like a multiple series of disasters that you could be looking at there.
Okay. So what I want to do here is just, okay. So what I want to do here is to think of this in terms of, so people have an understanding of why there can't be you can't put a specific time on things. And that's simply because we don't know what the sun is going to do. So then we have the question that, is the sun going into a quiescent period? Or is the sun amping up its its activity? And then the other thing I want to ask is, what do you think? I'm not sure, because I'm not actually sure I know the answer to this. So what do you think is actually causing the magnetic field itself to weaken? I mean, I know it's a cyclic thing; it does it, but do we have a good understanding as to, does the literature have a good understanding as to why it does this?
Yes. So there's a really thorough and evidence-based explanation that initially hits everybody as, wow, what? And let me start this way.
Sure.
In addition to there being major climate and magnetic changes on this cycle, they notice that there seems to be a major super flare. And we're talking 100 times bigger than the Carrington event in 1859, about every 6,000 years as well. Now, normally, the first thing someone thinks is, okay, well, the sun is big, the sun is powerful. If it puts out a super flare, let's just blame that. The problem is this event has been happening on Earth since the middle of the 1850s. It's not a momentary event.
Right.
And so the fact that a super flare happens at the same time as these magnetic changes, at the same time as these climate changes, at the same time as these extinctions, it's solid, but they can't be considered causal.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is something has to be affecting the Earth and the sun on this cycle. So what's interesting is you look at the sun right now and its atmospheric chemistry is changing. There's more helium being produced. There is more dust accumulating at the top of the sun's atmosphere, which we call the corona. And its magnetic fields are changing as well in ways that are unexpected and haven't been seen before. But it's not just the Earth and the sun having magnetic changes and changes to its atmosphere. We're seeing these on all of the planets in the solar system, and we're seeing it in interplanetary space as well. So the one planet we don't really have good information on is Mercury. Now we're about to, when the Bepi-Colombo satellite mission starts sending back data in the coming months and coming years, we'll be able to gauge how its magnetic field is doing compared to what another mission, the Messenger mission, gave us about a decade and a half ago.
Okay.
But we know for a fact that the winds at Venus are speeding up very quickly. We know that Mars has experienced greater climate change than the Earth has, and pretty radical seismic activity on Mars as well. And to top it all off, they now believe Mars' mantle is active, that it's not a dead planet. And they go through this very long-winded explanation for why they got it wrong before and why they thought it was a dead planet and all that. The thing is, I don't think they got it wrong before. I think it was dead and the planet is just waking back up. Jupiter's magnetic field is changing. The Great Red Spot is diminishing, and there are storm anomalies all across Jupiter. Saturn has major storm anomalies. Uranus and Neptune have both storm anomalies and auroral anomalies, their version of the northern lights and southern lights. Pluto lost a fifth of its atmosphere in only 1 year. And from the top of the sun's atmosphere out past Pluto, the dust in the solar system is increasing. And so we now have to begin to wonder, okay, the only thing we could tell by Earth evidence alone is what the Earth does. And if the sun throws a super flare at us, we can tell that in the geologic evidence as well. But it's looking like this is an entire solar system shift that is taking place. Atmospheric changes, magnetic changes, extra dust everywhere. And the thing is, there should be a cyclical event in the galaxy that hits our solar system over and over again that causes magnetic changes and brings extra dust to the solar system. Whether they're studying it in a lab, a sphere magnet spinning, or whether they're studying a star, any star they've studied, or when they're studying the Milky Way galaxy, or even any of the nearby galaxies that we can study well, they notice an electric current sheet going through the midplane of the galaxy or the solar system or the lab experiment. This wavy, rippling sheet that has a lot of charged particles. It attracts dust, just like an electrostatic Swiffer duster.
Right.
And it also marks where the northern magnetic fields and the southern magnetic fields meet. And so our solar system, as it's traveling around the galaxy, it gets hit by this wavy current sheet on a fairly cyclical and regular basis. And when this happens, we should expect three things. One, we are subject to the galactic magnetic reversal. Literally, the magnetic fields at the galactic level that are engulfing our entire solar system flip. While this is happening, extra charged particles, electrons, protons, things like that are coming in at the same time as extra dust is coming in. And they know for a fact that this is something that exists anytime there is a spinning magnetic system. In fact, they have studied the Milky Way so well that they know the amplitude, how high this wavy current sheet goes. They know its thickness, and they know approximately how fast it's traveling. And what's interesting is their best guesses for those three things have it hitting the Earth between 11 and 13,000 years apart. And that 12,000 year mark is right in the middle of that.
Right.
And so if you think about it, not only would that explain the cycle,
Right.
not only would that explain how both the Earth and the sun get activated to a certain degree, it would explain what's happening on all of the planets. It would explain the extra dust in the solar system. And this is something that actually has to be there. This isn't like oh, okay, well, this is an interesting hypothesis. They know it's there. They've characterized it. They've characterized some in nearby galaxies that we can study in that way, if they're not, edge on. For example, if we're looking at a galaxy and we just see the edge of it, so it looks like a flat line, it's hard to do. But when we can see the whole spiral of the galaxy, so basically we're looking down from one of the galaxy's poles.
Right.
They see it in other galaxies as well. And so what we are actually looking at here is a cyclical galactic magnetic reversal that brings extra dust, that changes the magnetic condition of our entire solar system. And more importantly for us here on Earth, it causes these cyclical magnetic pole shifts and causes the sun to have that outburst of activity.
Right. That's okay. So thank you for that. Because me personally, I watch the channel on a fairly regular basis, and so I go through the stuff, and I don't always get it all like set in stone in my head. And I go, well, that makes sense, and then I move on because I've got a billion other things going through my head on a daily basis. So that's the causal effect here. And to understand, like, this makes sense. Like, I mean, physically, we've seen this. I mean, it's just consistent with basically. I'll be honest with you, Ben. It's like this is not high end
Nope.
physics. I mean, this is just basic first semester. This is like second semester.
This is not
physics.
complex at all. I mean, virtually all of astrophysics or cosmological physics, or even, physics of the atmosphere. Those things are more complicated than this.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is the kind of thing where after they discovered it at the sun and discovered it at about 20 other stars in the galaxy, then they started characterizing the galactic version of this current sheet and in other galaxies. I had my buddy several years ago, Billy Yelverton, who runs a plasma lab in Georgia, do this experiment. Turn off all the lights, put an electric current to a spinning sphere magnet, so that you can actually see the glow mode plasma. And you could see, we did it in a lab.
Right. There you go.
It's so easy. And, this guy, yes, he worked HVAC his whole career, has been tinkering with electronics his whole career. This guy's not a PhD in this stuff. I mean, this is the kind of stuff where it's simple to set up the confirmatory experiment. It's simple to think about, okay, magnetic fields switching directions. It's simple to think of, extra dust being seen as a key marker of things happening. None of this is PhD level physics.
Right.
It's just, you have to marry, paleoclimatology, geomagnetism, atmospheric dynamics, solar activity, planetary science, galactic physics, and electromagnetism, You have to pull all of these things together in a Renaissance like interdisciplinary mishmash to
Mm-hmm.
even get there. And I love specialization of science. It's where the greatest innovations come from these days. But
Right.
also, what specialization of science has done, I mean, to get a paper published in a major journal today, you've got to keep your head down in the box and be ultra focused. You don't have time to peek your head up and look around and see what other people are doing. I I talk to professors who have no idea what their colleague down the hall in their department is working on
Yep.
outside of teaching their classes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's understandable because they've got to be hyper focused. And on top of that, they've got classes to teach, they've got papers to grade, tests to grade, they've got TAs to manage, they've got office hours, they've got department politics, and all these other things. So I had one professor, and for those who really follow my work, they might remember the name of this guy, but I won't blow up his spot right here. I talk to him fairly regularly. He's at Brown University, and he's one of the individuals who actually figured out how thick this electric current sheet is in the Milky Way.
Right.
He said to me about 2 years ago, Ben, it's like you're cheating. You don't have to drill down and make these discoveries. You get to see what all the discoveries are and pull them together. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have to go teach classes. You don't have to sit there for 3 hours of office hours and listen to student after student explain why they didn't show up for the test, or they need an opportunity to rewrite this paper or something.
Right.
And so it's not an easy thing to do, even though all of the science involved is relatively easy. It's
Right.
that you have to find it from so many different places and put it all together.
Yeah. No, that's a really important point. I think and it is like, specialization is for ants, right? I know I listening to you talk about it reminds me of some of the stuff that I do here, where I'm trying to marry what's happening geopolitically with what's happening economically, what's happening culturally, and you're trying to marry those things together, and then understand the personalities of the people who were setting the policy, and it winds up being, again, a big interdisciplinary thing, and only certain and it is a luxury. We get to sit around all day, 60, 70 hours a week, thinking about these things in these terms in this
Exactly.
way.
Exactly.
And as opposed to the quote unquote specialists who don't. Yeah, it is a luxury. And
It is. It is a luxury, and that's exactly the point. The specific study that this guy did, and this goes for pretty much everyone making these discoveries. It's we're talking months to, in some cases, years of all free research time being dedicated to just one point.
yes.
When that happens, the same people making those individual discoveries have no chance of putting together a bigger picture.
No.
And so this is why you need to step back and have somebody else doing interdisciplinary renaissance like thinking, trying to pull it all together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that it's that complex, it's that it requires you to be unburdened
Yes.
by the hyper specialization of scientific fields.
Well, and again, the other thing that popped into my head while we started moving into this direction was, I go back to Thomas Gold and his book, The Deep Hot Biosphere.
Yeah.
Tommy Gold was he popped into my head the other day because Freeman. I saw a short thing on Twitter the other day of Freeman Dyson talking about his friend Thomas Gold, and he called him Tommy, of course. And Tom Gold was one of those guys who refused to just stay in the box. He kept constantly popping out and saying, "Okay, what does all this stuff mean?" And think out of the box, go interdisciplinary, and then say, "Well, what if oil isn't dead plankton and dead dinosaurs?
Yeah.
What if this, what if this, what if that?" And I remember reading the Deep Hot Biosphere and watching stuff about this 25, 30 years ago. It's the same thing with like Richard Wrangham's book, Catching Fire, why cooking made us human. right? It's again, it's another of those like seminal books or inquisitions about that take a completely different view of what we think we understand about biology or chemistry or physics or whatever, and marry those things in multiple in marry multiple disciplines, and then come up with a synthetic conclusion based on those things. And
Right.
it's a very difficult thing to do. And those that do it well, they're usually hated
Yeah.
by,
You
by
know,
those
Tommy
who
Gold,
have specialized.
Tommy Gold was actually one of the first people who talked about the Great Solar Eruption. He's got some excellent work on that as well. Now, it falls short of what we're able to determine today, but when you look at the tools he had in his toolbox back then,
Mm-hmm.
some of the stuff he was able to figure out seems like wizardry, magic,
Right.
sorcery. It's like, how were you able to tease that out of such little data? It's like, okay, you've got two screws and a hammer and you built a house. How? How did you do that? But
Well,
now we have all the tools now and all the information.
well, it's
Um,
funny. Like some people just have, they have an uncommon, they have an uncommon mind and an uncommon ability to put this versus this versus that. It is interesting you say that, because as an undergraduate, in the University of Florida, I talk about my research director, Dr. Phil Brucat, was one of those guys. And we would sit there and design. We'd go to the Purple Porpoise after our physical chemistry exams, and he'd take us out drinking at the Purple Porpoise, which no longer exists. And then after everybody else left, he and I would be sitting at the bar. He'd be ordering me drinks, and we'd be designing new experiments on cocktail napkins, right?
yeah,
And but what was interesting was that I would sit there as an undergraduate saying, we'd be talking about, what we're doing in the laboratory. And he says, you do understand what it is we're doing here. I just thought it was very cool stuff we were doing. Like, we were creating transition metal rare gas clusters in the gas phase, and then blowing them apart to see what the bond structure and the bond energy and everything else was, to understand, to literally create molecules the world had never seen before in order to characterize them, and then basically place their data in the Janif tables for all the Gibbs free energy and enthalpy and all that's the basic, like real basic stuff. And he looked at me one day and he said, when we were doing this, he said, do you understand what we're trying to do here? I'm like, no, I guess not, because I've got lost in the weeds of the really cool stuff. He's like, the goal here is to build up to the point where we can actually talk about a real system like water, and what happens when we put ions into water and we understand water chemistry, and we've built it up from the quantum level to the thermodynamic bulk and then and beyond. I mean, he's like, that's what we're doing here. And we start with vanadium argon ball. The argon is a ball, the vanadium atom. Then we go to stick, O2, and then we go to the big stick, CO2, because the structure of CO2 is basically three atoms in a line. Then you go to boomerang, water, propeller, ammonia, and that's the way he described it all. And I'm like, and it's at that moment that I realized, okay, when you're dealing with people who are at that level of not just intellect, but of purpose, because he had a purpose, and that was incredibly inspiring. And it was like, I'm like, oh, okay, and yeah, I want to be that guy. That's what I said to
right.
myself at the time when I was like, 21, 22 years old. I'm like, oh, I want to be that guy. And
Yeah.
it took me a long time to get there and to do it
Well,
in a completely
and
different idiom, but there it is.
those people today are doing some of the most important stuff right now. Um, a lot of the people who saw COVID for what it was, from the actual virus to what the vaccines were, to the financial incentives to doctors, to some of the shenanigans at the FDA and the pharma companies. It's the same kind of multidisciplinary analysis. I mean, for
Mm-hmm.
somebody could think of it and be like, okay, well, no, I mean, it's all the same thing, but no, it's kind of not. It's literally it's chemistry, it's virology, it's human biology, it's several different aspects of pathogenesis, it's regulatory procedures, it's economics, it's human psychology of people in power when money is involved, and other things like that.
Mhm.
I don't know if you know who Brett Weinstein is, but
Oh
he's
yeah,
great at this as well. He's another guy who, like you, like me, does not stay in his lane, and there's an incredible benefit to that. Now, I know we're kind of coming up on the end here, so there's two other things I wanted to mention about this event.
sure.
Um, One of the things that should happen electromagnetically and from all this dust is that the sun, right before its big blast, it should go dark.
Okay, now
That
explain.
that
And I think I remember why, but I want you to kind of
there's two main reasons. So the luminosity of the sun, its brightness,
Mhm.
is wholly based on surface processes, things that are happening at the top of the sun.
Right.
And these are all electrical processes. And there appears to be an interaction of the sun's internal electrodynamic activity with external electrodynamic activity from the galaxy. Now, right when we're moving from the northern magnetic fields to the southern magnetic fields in the galaxy, which is what's happening this cycle. We're in the northern magnetic fields now, and we're going to the south. In order
Okay.
to get there, we have to cross the 0 point, which basically means there will not be any magnetic influence on the sun. This is going to begin to disrupt those surface processes. Now, this does two things. One is it begins to dim the light that the sun produces, and it begins to put a stopper in what's called the solar wind, which is it's this charged particle wind that blows in every direction from the
Hmm.
sun, north, south, east, west, everywhere throughout the solar system. And when that happens, all this extra dust can begin to accumulate. And so at the same time that the sun is slightly losing its luminosity, it's also having its atmosphere become dusty. These two things combine to make the sun look like it's going dark.
That makes sense.
Then, of course, very soon thereafter, and probably we're talking about somewhere between 1 and 7 days, it could be that 3 days of darkness that is in several religious texts.
Hmm.
Um, we enter the other magnetic field of the galaxy. The sun gets its juice back, and it blasts off all of this material in what I've called a micronova. Um,
Right.
you know, 3 years ago, people were saying I was crazy and micronova didn't exist. And then 2 years ago, astronomers were like, huzzah, we have discovered micronova are real things. Um, uh, we can't believe it. We never would have imagined that this was a real thing. They still haven't gotten to the point where they admit the sun can do it yet, but they've now discovered probably 30 or 40 micronova events in the galaxy um, just in the last 2 years, and so they'll get there eventually.
Right.
Um, but what's interesting about that is it's just one of several things that seems to match up pretty perfectly with these religious stories. Another good example is the way people will be acting, the way society will be acting. They
Hmm.
will turn from God, they will turn to sin and greed and debauchery and degeneracy and other
Hmm.
things like that. And it's kind of exactly what we're seeing in the world right now.
Yeah.
Not only on individual levels, but take a look at what's being pushed. There's really no doubt. If you pay attention to anything from the Super Bowl halftime show to the Grammys to individual music videos, you can see there's this promotion of evil, of
Hmm.
satanic symbolism, and it's kind of on point with what we're expecting to see in terms of how individuals will think and react. Um, the Bible says it's happening because of sin, but what's interesting is this extra radiation that we talked about at the beginning of the show. It has two main effects on the brain. One, it impairs the hippocampus, which is where cognitive activity comes from, which is a very fancy way of saying everybody gets a little dumber. And at the same time, everybody's getting a little dumber, it overexcites the locus ceruleus, which is very sensitive to electrical activity. And the locus ceruleus is the part of the brain that reacts to powerful negative emotions like fear, terror, anxiety, panic, even hatred. And so if it seems like people are getting dumber, they're getting more hateful and angry, and they're becoming more emotionally unstable and emotionally reactive, yes, they are. And there's a very good scientific reason for that. The issue is this was also written about thousands of years ago in these books. Last thing on the docket, and this is the one that's hardest for people to wrap their head around, but the evidence is there, and this is also talked about in those religious texts as well. The earth almost certainly is going to tilt. I think probably about 90 degrees. Now, there could be a 15 to 20% error range in there. It could be 70 degrees. It could be 110 degrees, but the crust is almost certainly going to shift. Einstein knew this for a fact. Chan Thomas knew it. Cuvier, Deluc, Leibniz, all the people who studied these great disasters in the past knew it. And some of the evidence that has been discovered is just so incontrovertible. The two best examples are the evidence discovered by Project Nanook in the Arctic, led by Major Maynard E. White. Major Maynard E. White actually committed treason. He kept several documents from the mission and from the Pentagon meetings that they had in the aftermath of the mission, where the predecessor for the CIA, the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, they ended up morphing into the CIA. But the OSS at the time, in concert with the Rand Corporation, determined that what they had found in the Arctic was alternating levels of polar fossils, tropical fossils, polar fossils, tropical fossils. And they determined that the Earth tilts 90 degrees, basically putting the poles at the equator and parts of the tropics at the polar region, to explain this. And if it wasn't for Major White keeping those classified documents to give to his son to publish in the book World in Peril, several decades later, we might not know of it. The other great example is the mammoths, the frozen mammoths. Now, most people think that the great mystery is, how do you freeze a mammoth so quickly that the food doesn't digest in its mouth or stomach?
Right.
That is certainly an interesting thing to discuss. What I want to know is what the mammoths were eating. Because here's the thing. You take a look at where these mammoths were found. There's nothing for them to eat there. They were basically found in, 10, 20, 30 feet of ice. They couldn't have been living in those conditions. They need hundreds to over 1,000 pounds of vegetation a day. So what were they eating? Furthermore, they were frozen during the glacial period. We are in an interglacial period right now. In fact, we're 12,000 years into an interglacial period, which means it was even colder back when they were frozen. So take a look at that area that does not have enough vegetation for them to eat right now. Make it 5 to 10 degrees colder and ask yourself, what in the world were the mammoths doing there? And the answer is that they probably weren't there at that latitude. They were at a different latitude. The Earth turned over and they found themselves rapidly freezing at the polar region. Because, when you think about what a mammoth has to eat, and the fact that there's not even enough food there today, 12,000 years into an interglacial warm period, on top of all the global warming they say is happening, there's still not enough vegetation for them to eat. You telling me in the middle of a glacial period they had enough food to eat? No way. They were at lower latitudes, and then the Earth tilted and put them at the polar region. And so On top of everything we already discussed, there's this shifting of the planet, which not only is going to change every location's climate because you're not at the same latitude you were before, but when the Earth tilts like that, the oceans are going to slosh and cause titanic tsunamis. There's a layer of sediment in the Gulf of Mexico that shows that it had to have been deposited by a wave from the Pacific Ocean that came over top of the Rockies. There are these muck deposits in Alaska where it's literally dozens of feet of bones and mud and trees all smashed and piled together all in one. And you can find this in other places in the world as well. There are enormous, 50-ton blocks of rock pushed 2 kilometers up the Alps in
Right.
several different places, and no evidence of human cutting or of the rocks or anything like that, let alone how the humans could have pulled these things up mountains.
Right.
But if you've got great waves to do it, it makes sense. There's evidence for this in Africa, Australia, India, China, Russia, all over the place. And so we're really actually looking at a galactic solar system, Earth level, complete catastrophe.
Right.
From radiation, from the Earth turning over, from climate changes, from navigational changes, to now also the possibility of losing electricity. And you realize that this is what almost everybody should be talking about, given the fact that we're completely due in time for it, and it's already started. It hasn't just started, it's accelerating and getting worse and worse. The solar storm back in May showed us just how vulnerable we are. Everybody should be talking about this, and in reality, almost nobody is.
Yeah, no, it's funny. You say all of that, and as you were describing all of that, I'm looking at my desktop as we do this, and my desktop is a picture I took at the Grand Canyon when we went to visit it a few years ago, and I think back to the talks I've heard from guys like Randall Carlson and others about, well, North America does not look like, the topography of North America doesn't look like it was created naturally. It looks more like, a big runoff system, like a big wave came across and just, carved large, scars across the entire continent. And that makes so much more sense than the classic gradualism of the dominant thinking. And dude, we haven't even discussed about the difference between your electromagnetic model of the universe, and it's yours, but the electromagnetic model of the universe is the gravitic one, and all of those other issues that we could go into for another hour or 2 hours. But it's just, we have to reframe the way we interact with the things that are right around us, and be better observers of and better questioners of the world we literally inhabit. And the last point, I'm going to give you the last word here, because this I think is really, really important. It was something that, as I told you off camera before we started, my wife, what my wife really appreciates about everything that you present is that you present it as, this is not fear mongering. These are the facts. This is what's happened, and we can prepare. And I want you to talk about the mindset of what it is, what mindset you have to have in order to get through this, because we're clearly here, and this has happened before, and this will happen again. Right.
Right. So I see a lot of people become discouraged with the possibility of this. But what everybody needs to remember is humans have made it through a bunch of these, and everybody alive today is descended from a survivor. It's in our DNA. We've done it before, and we can do it again. It requires some determination. It requires staying informed about everything that's happening. It requires not getting too depressed or lost in the sauce of all of this. And then it requires action. Everything that would normally be considered in the world of prepping, having extra food, having extra water, having a way to protect yourself and your family. But at this level, it goes a step further. Having seeds, having pre-industrial tools, thinking about, okay, how did the Vikings do it? How did the cavemen do it? How did people do it before there was electricity? You know how to hunt? Do you know how to grow food? Do you know how to build shelter? Do you know how to watch the sky and watch the leaves on the trees to know what the weather's going to be like later in the day? It's important to basically take that prepper mindset and blow it up to a years, decades, possibly generations of living like a caveman or a Viking, something like that. But at the same time, there's all that preparation that comes with it. And then you'll have to execute when all of this stuff happens. And execution of something like this in the face of absolutely terrifying natural conditions with literally death all around you will require quite a bit of focus and strength. And when it comes to that, it will be very important that we're not weighed down by things in our past. You know, this is something it took me a long time to realize, but every negative aspect of someone's personality is tied to an insecurity that they have. And most of those are tied to deeper seated traumas. And these things can be rooted out and be fixed. It just takes a good bit of work, and it doesn't happen overnight. And it takes a lot of humility and brutal honesty with yourself. On top of all of that, it's really important to remain positive. In addition to all the reasons somebody could probably imagine that it would be a good idea to remain positive, if you are subject to an electric current, the way your body will actually react to it depends on your mental state. If you're in a bad mental state, you have a better chance of having a heart attack. If you're in a good mental state, you have a better chance of laughing when you get a shock. And be like, whoa, that was interesting. That was electrifying. And that might actually be the hardest part of this, because how do you stay positive in the face of this? But for those who can, they're going to have an unbelievable advantage, not only in terms of being able to stay focused on preparing for this event, staying focused on remaining informed so you know where we are and what's coming, but the execution of survival and protecting yourself and your family in the aftermath. All of these things require you to fix, you know, obviously if you have any physical health problems, you're going to want to address those, but they require you to have the right mental state, from fixing what's already wrong to making sure you have the right mindset going forward. And it might not seem as important as having extra food or seeds or bullets, but it's probably just as important as those things.
It is. It's absolutely is. And even if, and I'm going to end it here by saying, and even if these things do not come to pass for whatever reason, if somehow we get, if let's just, for lack of a bet, let's just pull it. What if you're wrong? Right, Ben. What if you're only partially correct? What if you're...
That would be so wonderful.
Yeah, I agree.
That would be so nice to be wrong.
Right. Wouldn't, yeah, right. Wouldn't, yeah, that what we're dealing with here is, in what you presented isn't what, you know, you can say is an order of magnitude problem. Yeah, these things are going to occur, but the way you've described it now is, maybe it's a couple of orders of magnitude worse than what actually is likely to occur. Let's just put it there. You're still going to need everything you just described. And
absolutely,
the people around you in that same mindset, because you're not going to be able to do this by yourself in any way, manner, shape, or form. There's no fucking way you're going to be able to do this, even 1/10 of this on your own, or in a, you're just not going to be that. Like, it was funny watching that terrible Obama movie, Leave the World Behind. And if you saw it, I watched it in horror as to what Obama thinks the average prepper looks like, meaning the Kevin Bacon character in that movie. And I was like, yeah, dude, that is so not us. Like, that is so not who we are. That's your projection of who you think everyone is. That's not you. And it was quite pathetic, actually. And I'm like, yeah, no, that just made me even more convinced. Like, it doesn't matter. You have to understand that this is, as you say all the time, eyes open, no fear.
Right.
And it's a brilliant thing. And I really appreciate it. It's like years and years ago, I chided the libertarian movement by saying, look, we can't be against everything. We have to be for something. Our taglines have to be positive. It has to be a statement of positive action, not a statement of what we're against. Being against something is easy. Being for something is fucking hard as shit in this environment. So, you know me, I swear like a sailor, So,
I do on my live streams quite a bit, actually.
yeah, I've watched a couple. They're fun. So, any other last words, Ben? I think it's a shame actually that Dave decided to have sex with farm animals this afternoon as opposed
I know. I hope the goat was worth it. But I guess all I would say is if people want to know more about this stuff, I have tons of explanatory videos on my YouTube channel. Tons, and I do that daily update on the sun, the earth, and any relevant science news coming to this. There's a lot of ways to go deeper, but the absolute best way to start getting aware and staying aware, it's the free videos on my YouTube channel, Suspicious Observers. And so I appreciate anybody willing to come check out what's going on there, make yourself knowledgeable, and stay up to date on all of this stuff while you're also keeping up to date with the economic, political, and cultural nonsense as well.
Agreed. All right, Ben. Hopefully we'll do this again, and we'll do this in such a way that it's not a basic primer into what you do. I'd like to pick your brain or just have a general conversation with you in the future about what all the other that stuff is about. So, but I wanted to at least lay some groundwork this morning and do that. So, appreciate
that's great. Yeah. Thank you very much. I had a good time. Thanks for the invitation.
You're more than welcome. You have a great weekend. We'll talk soon. Well, that'll about wrap it up for episode 193 of the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast. I want to thank Ben Davidson for taking the time out and doing the get to know you thing. And in some ways, I almost feel bad that Dave Collum wasn't there. I wasn't here today, but, things happen. With that said, I'm out. So you can follow my work, as always, over at my blog at tomluongo.me or goldgoatsandguns.com. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728. You can follow Ben on Twitter at Space Weatherman. And you can follow the Patreon at patreon.com/goldgoatsandguns, where you can sign up for just the biweekly market reports and private blogs, or you can upgrade and get the whole Megillah with the monthly Gold, Goats, and Guns investment newsletter, where Dexter White and I do a full look ahead as to what's coming, as well as having a full portfolio for trying to take advantage of what's going on. So if any of that appeals to you, then do the thing. You guys be well. You take care. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.